Welcome to the Waddyado Podcast, where I sit down and speak with professionals having honest conversations about their careers, how they got into them, and advice for those looking to follow a similar path. But most of all, telling you, the listeners, what it's really like to do that job. In this episode, we sit down with the storytelling extraordinaire and Chief Marketing Officer, Jamie Mackenzie. Jamie is the best-selling author of 28 Bags of Sprouts and has worked in product marketing for brands such as Samsung, Toshiba, and Pluxee. Jamie shares insights into the realities of product marketing, building lasting relationships through marketing, and inside secrets into his unique storytelling framework. I hope you enjoy. Well, Jamie, welcome to the Waddyado Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Pleasure to be on it. Looking forward to our chat. Very much so.
Fabulous. Well, firstly, Jamie, obviously you've had an incredible career from some wonderful brands covering Samsung, Toshiba, and Pluxee. Now, obviously, you've launched your career throughout wonderful pivots and into obviously a chief marketing officer position. So I'm really keen just to get into the nitty gritty of, you know, your background, all about you, and kind of go from there really. And then also talking into your most recent endeavors of becoming an author. So very exciting times. So without further ado, Jamie, would you like to just kind of describe what you do for a living to someone who isn't necessarily in your field or industry, perhaps what you would have told your grandparents or something like that?
So thank you, Claudia. Well, I think my answer would have changed if you asked me it 7 months ago, kind of versus today. So maybe if I take my 7 months ago answer, where I was the chief marketing officer at Pluxee, which had rebranded from Sodexo, a project a rebrand that I actually led in the business. So at the time, the best way to describe it to my gran, bless her, is that I take products and I market them to people. Ultimately, that's what I do. So my role there was to create something based on the need of someone else and to package it in a way that is attractive enough and adds value enough for that individual to buy. So in a nutshell, that's what it would be. The complexities of that are much more detailed, which I'm sure we can unpack. But that's ultimately what I did functionally. What I also did from a leadership perspective, I'd tell my gran that my responsibility was to care for, lead and support and grow people that worked within my teams. That probably would have been my answer then. If you skip forward to today, what I tell my gran, who knows actually anyway, she's kind of super proud of what I've done. I describe myself as a best-selling author in business communication. So I released a book 2 months ago, and yeah, I'm proud to say that it was a top 5 bestseller on Amazon in the first month. I also go and speak at companies about the importance of my topic, which is storytelling. And also help people and businesses to level up their communication skills to better storytell in everything that they do. So that's what I do today in hopefully layman's terms. No,
that was a fabulous introduction. Thank you so much, Jamie. So I'm keen to get into, I guess, the beginning of your career to understand exactly what attracted you to go into marketing to begin with.
So kind of my journey, it's a funny one actually, because I'd like to say I fell into it, but actually there is a story behind it. So I left school. I went to sixth form at school, and I was presented with 4 options at the time. I could have taken over the greengrocers that I was working in at that moment.
Okay.
I could have done an apprenticeship at BT as part of their kind of call center work, 'cause my cousin worked there. I could have joined an apprenticeship scheme around quantity surveying, or I could have gone to university. So I kind of had these 4 pathways open to me, and I decided that I wanted to not go into the world of work just yet. So I decided to go to university, and I went down to the University of Solent, as it's called now. And during that time, I did business studies. And so I was able to get exposure to kind of different modules, different functions of kind of business. So we did everything from law to HR to finance to operations and also marketing. And for some reason, I think it was more, I just quite enjoyed the variety of marketing more than anything else. Not so much, understanding people and matching needs. It was just, I found it was quite a varied role, a varied type of function. So as part of that course, you did a placement year in the third year, where you did a bit of a year's work experience, finished your last year, and then you went on. And so I had to apply for jobs for my placement year, and I didn't really take it that seriously. But one of my friends was applying for a role, and he said, look, I'm driving up there. Jamie, you haven't done much, so apply for this role and come with me. I'll drive us up there. We'll do the interview. It's a good experience. So we were driving up there. I said, oh, I'm really excited. You know, I'd love to work for a car manufacturer. And he said, Jamie, it's Toshiba. I thought it was Toyota.
So, great start, Jamie.
Rule number one, if you're going to work in marketing, do your research. It's very, very important. But clearly at the time I didn't. So I was like, okay, fine. So we drove up there. Anyway, we did the interviews, and 2 weeks later, I got a letter, when you had letters back in the day, which was over 20 years ago, to say that I got the role. I've been offered the placement, which was amazing. And it was in the marketing department at Toshiba as their marketing assistant. So anyway, just skip forward a few months, and I turned up for my first day, and I spoke to the two recruiter managers, Jeremy and Steve, and I asked them why I got the role, because I wasn't given that feedback, you know, just the fact that I got the role. And I thought it was about talking about Porter's 5 forces of marketing, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, the kind of the suit I was in. It had nothing to do with it. It was about a story I told about selling 28 bags of sprouts on Christmas Eve in my greengrocers. They said, that's why I got the role. And I said, well, I didn't talk about marketing. He said, it wasn't about that. It was the fact that the story that you told stood you out from everybody else. Everyone else talked about the same stuff, but you were different. And we thought you'd really fit well in. So the story got me into the role, but the interest in the diversity of marketing was kind of first attracted me. And then I stepped into that, and I spent the year there as a placement student, and actually ended up going back there after I graduated. They said, Jamie, you know, whatever your result is, we'll give you a job here, which is probably the worst thing they could have said to me.
I'm keen to hear about the sprout story now. Are you going to tell it to me now, or are you going to dive into it later when we get to the book?
It's directly linked to the book, but I'll tell it now. Okay. But basically, I go back to, it was the Christmas of 1999, and I was working at the greengrocers. It was Christmas Eve, and on that day, it was absolutely crazy busy in the shop. A brilliant place to work. Greengrocer was probably my favorite job, to be honest, I've ever had. And I was out there, and we were just churning through sprouts, and we were selling so many that I had to set up a table out the front of the shop, because for whatever reason, it was the vegetable of choice at the time. And anyway, throughout that day, it just felt like all I was doing was literally putting sprouts out, filling them up, refilling. And at the end of the day, I was really intrigued. So I went to the bin. We had a big bin in the backyard, and I pulled out all of these green nets, empty nets, sprout nets, and I counted them out, and there was 28. And I went to my boss at the time, and I said, Mike, you know, is that a record? He said, Jamie, I don't have documented records of how many sprouts are sold on Christmas Eve, but I think it could be a record. So I told this story with such enthusiasm, passion, and pride in the interview. And it was more me as a person that was lifted through that story that kind of really connected with them, because I was authentic, honest, and just, you know, beaming with pride. And that was the story. And that kind of leads on to the book and the topic of storytelling, but that's what I told. And that kind of started me off on my pathway into the world of marketing.
So then obviously you then returned back to Toshiba once you graduated, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I returned back to Toshiba in 2003 after I graduated. So they offered me a job, and I walked straight into a product manager position, which at the time was amazing. So, you know, in terms of salary at the time, so this was 2003. So I was on a basic of £25,000, which over 20 years ago was pretty cool.
Even graduates get that kind of salary these days, which is crazy.
I know, which is crazy. And I also got a company car with that as well, albeit at the time I couldn't drive. So I had to quickly learn to drive. Because my role was as a product manager, and as maybe some of the listeners as product managers, it's a really diverse role. You know, one minute you're presenting a product, next minute you're pricing it, next minute you're training on it, you know, next minute you are building a strategy around it. So I think it's a wonderful role for people in marketing to be really grounded in the full 360 business, you know, interactions of a product. It's really good. So I started off in that role, and through the 5 years I was at Toshiba, I was sort of growing in seniority. So I then became senior product manager. Then I was head of product management. So it would have been around the ages of 27, 28. working a lot with the dealer network and the direct sales people. It was a really great grounding for me at that age.
And so on a day-to-day, just for people who aren't very familiar with like what product management is, can you just talk through just a little bit more detail about what you would have been doing?
Absolutely. So as I said, it's incredibly varied. So I would typically start the day, at that time, emails were a thing. A couple of years they weren't really, but emails sort of came in, and I'll be dealing with emails at the start. It will be maybe pricing offers that the salespeople wanted to use or offer, because I was in control of all the pricing of the product. So that kind of responsibility sat with me. So I could approve up to like a 20% discount, depending on the deals that were being offered. And if I wanted to go above that, I then had to move sort of on to my manager to get that approved. So that would be normally the first hour or so of the morning. They always knew that was a time when I was available to do that. Typically on the days, we would have someone coming into the showroom. So I was product manager for photocopiers and printers. So I would go to the showroom along with the salesperson or the dealer with their customer, and I would do a demonstration of the product. So I'd always do that late mornings. So I would do a demonstration of a photocopier, which was super exciting at the time, for me at least. But it was a great way to kind of practice your public speaking, engaging with people. Taking challenging questions, showing what it can do, and just helping the salesperson manage the process. So that usually be for a couple of hours.
And just to clarify, this is obviously with B2B market, not B2C. Sorry, so you're not selling a big photocopier to...
absolutely. That's a really great point. It was all B2B. So it was all with sort of businesses, so you'd have business owners, procurement officers, general managers, office managers that were making. And at the time, there weren't small purchases. They typically be bought on a 3-year lease. You'd have all of the toner consumables with it, etc. So, it's quite a complicated deal, especially if you've got more than one product that you're buying. So I would then do that usually. And then I'd always be good, certainly as a student, not as a student, in my early years of taking a lunch break. It got less as I sort of grow in my roles. But I typically spend a bit of time with the team in marketing. We'd have a bit of lunch together. And then the afternoon was typically dedicated on, creating a promotion. So obviously we had to work on selling the products. So I would work with the marketing communications team that would sort of work in the graphic design. So Adobe at the time, and they would create brochures. They would create promotional materials, marketing materials, which would then be shared. So typically we would always have changes to those, or we'd be looking to create another campaign. So I would be working with them on that as the product lead. So to make sure that the messages were right, the content was aligned to the product, the right specifications are in there, things like this. And then usually at the end of every day, we would have a sales meeting. So what I would do, these weren't Teams calls at the time, these were physical meetings where the leads would come in, and myself along with the other product manager would join, and we would listen to how the sales were going. We would listen to what some of the objections were, what people are looking for, what's working well, what isn't. And then we would use that information to kind of feed into the next day. So the days were always engaging with lots of different types of stakeholders, absolutely. And the days were always focused on how you can sell more product, how you can find opportunity, resolve issues.
Thank you. So what would you say are good attributes for this kind of position? Let's say someone's looking to get into product marketing or product. What would you say is a good fit in terms of someone's skill set, personality type, all that kind of thing?
So I would say I'd split it into two. I think you've got, and actually I'd probably answer this question to any position I've been in. There's the core element, and then there's the technicalities. I believe the three most important core elements needed to be successful in this role. Number one, storytelling. And I'd answer that question to anything, because I could never do anything in that role or any role I've done unless I could communicate with people. If I can't communicate with people, I couldn't do anything. So with that being such a currency in business, storytelling is a pathway to doing it with impact. So storytelling would be number one skill. The second is that I always cared about what I did. So I could answer that in saying, a strong work ethic, but I don't think you need to work 12-hour days, weekends. That's what I don't mean. I mean that you just take pride and care in what you do. So I think that can really make a difference. And then the third element of the core is be kind. I think kindness is super important. And it doesn't mean you say yes to everyone. I don't mean that, but you approach things with respect, understanding, empathy. And I think that kindness is important. The technical skills within product management, you need to be I think you need to be commercially orientated. So you don't necessarily have to be data obsessed, but you have to have a commercial awareness of action and impact. I think that's really important. Number one, I think with product managers, you are the face of the product. So that means that you have to engage with people. You have to represent it. You're an ambassador for the product. So with that comes a sense of presenting yourself and being comfortable with being in meetings, speaking up. It's not always about being enthusiastic, but having energy around your product, because people will see you as the product. So I think that's a really important component of a product manager. And then the final thing is that I think with product management, there needs to be an element of resilience, because depending on how much you get involved in the product, it's your baby. You take it really personally. So you'll have good days where sales are great. You'll have bad days where sales aren't great, and people are telling you all the faults of your product. So your ability to be resilient with that, I think, is really important, because you'll always have good days. You'll always have bad days. You'll always have everything in between. But try not to let that get to you and take it personally, because sometimes the hand you get dealt with a product isn't a reflection of you, but how you manage it is a reflection of you. So I think that's important. So those are probably some of the nitty-gritty elements I would share with that one, Claudia.
My question for you just on that is, where you're exposed, say, let's for example, as a customer success manager, or you're an account manager, or you're a product, I guess my question is probably, how do you overcome that and not then see the product in a really negative light, because you're getting all these, like, say you're getting some negative feedback. Obviously you can pass that on to the tech teams to develop, but how do you sort of not take that on yourself? What would you recommend for people?
I think that's a really great question. It's a hard one. It's going to happen. I promise. And actually, I'm talking about hardware products here. See, and don't get me wrong, I've led teams on software products as well, kind of in my last 10 years. And that opens up a whole different can of worms of challenges, especially when you're developing it yourself, right? You're working with suppliers and you've got expectation management. I mean, crikey, I've made so many mistakes in that area, which you learn from, right? But I think you need to try and, it's hard to, you need to just try and create a barrier to protect yourself from those feelings. How do you do that? I think you just need to ensure surrounding yourself with the right people, that you've got a positive attitude around it. So there are going to be bad days. You do have to deliver bad messages. Storytell it in the best way you can. Don't lie, don't manipulate, don't sugarcoat things. Just be honest and authentic in yourself. And I think people will understand. You sometimes need to create this barrier so it doesn't hit your heart, which is hard. But equally, you're human and it will do. And I think that's okay, because going back to my first skill, which is about caring, when you do care, it will hit your heart. There's no question about that. So I just think, be aware of it. I think walk in eyes wide open in these types of roles. And I think, you try and manage it yourself. You know yourself better than anyone,
Definitely. I think also it's quite good to tap into like positive case studies, or try and, speak to customers, like maybe get off the phone to someone who was maybe difficult, but then pick up the phone to a customer that is really enjoying it, really enjoying the product, to like give you back that, okay, actually this is a great product, but also take on board that feedback to obviously make.
Do you know what? That's absolutely, that's a really great point. And I think looking for the positives, absolutely, because I think there'll always be a negative, there'll always be something more you can do. But I think, as you say, keeping a vision and exposure to the positives can really help us. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Awesome. So let's have guide on to Samsung. So obviously you went and worked from Toshiba to Samsung. So what led you to Samsung?
Well, so it's interesting. So I think when I reflect back on my moves through my career, they've been triggered by happiness. I talk about this concept of playing hide and seek with your happiness. I think sometimes you can kind of stop listening to it and it goes hiding, and then you've got to go find it. And so I try and listen to my happiness as much as possible. And in my 20s, to be perfectly honest, I wanted to get experience, but I was all about the money. I wanted the money in my 20s, to be honest. Yeah.
So was I.
No, you know what? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's fine, and whether that's true happiness, okay, fine. But that's what made you happy in the time. So as I got to my late 20s into my 30s, I wanted to kind of get a balance of more money and then what would have been, a bit later on, influence. So Samsung came along in my late 20s. I wanted a bit more influence, wanted more money. There was a glass ceiling at Toshiba, but that was cool. And they headhunted me for a role in their kind of printing B2B division, so slightly more products within their European team at the time. And then I moved when I was there into the UK team. And it was heading up their product marketing and then their B2B marketing for the UK. But they dangled this opportunity in front of me with succession and a ton more cash. And at the time, I was warned off a little bit, being open about Samsung, because of at the time, the working culture there. But I was really eager with the money and the responsibility. So I was like, yeah, I do it. And that's honestly why I kind of jumped and went. Obviously, the opportunity as well was there. So I went into Samsung then for 6 years. So I spent 2 years in a European role, which was amazing. Mm-hmm. And then I spent 4 years heading up B2B marketing for the UK division of Samsung, which was equally amazing because it was also at the time when the Galaxy phone was being launched for the first time. There was a lot of change that was happening, introducing that to B2B channels. It was a fabulous period of time. It was absolutely crazy and chaotic, but the next level of grounding of me as a person came from that environment. And that's something that I will always hold incredibly dear to me, actually, aside from crazy stories.
When you say grounding, what can you elaborate? What do you mean?
I think so when I was at Toshiba, there was a level of grounding that I was getting, which was about business concept, business principles, how the operations of business were working, certainly in a product management role. When I moved to Samsung, it took it to a completely different scale. And I mean, in terms of sales numbers, in terms of coverage, European level, a broader UK level, certainly when you're dealing with more the consumer type products. And the pressure, because in the world of Samsung, it's all at the time, it was all about the hardware, shifting as much hardware as possible. And you would have hardware coming over on boats that were landing in like 6 weeks, every week at a time. And that stock had to be moved. So I was there as like product management and category management. So I was still very much in that commercial mindset, moving product. And the pressure is at a completely different level. So when I say grounding, I'm not saying that pressure was a good thing in that sense, but the exposure I had, the types of initiatives I was working on, the budgets, the different types of stakeholders, the seniority of the stakeholders that I were working with, it all kind of just leveled up. And so it exposed me to a different ecosystem of business is maybe the best way to describe it. And so for me, I was working off core skills I'd had and built at Toshiba, but I was amplifying them to kind of different arenas.
From Samsung, obviously, you went on to, Sodexo is now branded, obviously, as Pluxee.
The division I was in,
Yeah. So give us a little bit of an overview as to what they do and also, obviously, what your role involves.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was at that point, I was in my early 30s. And at that stage, what made me happy was not so much money anymore. It's more about influence. And it's more about influencing a company, its direction and its people and its policies and other things. And because I think with Toshiba and Samsung, it's absolutely amazing grounding, but you are part of a process. Unless you're at the very, very top, you really are a part of a process. It's operational. Whereas I was offered an opportunity, I was headhunted to become the director of marketing at Sodexo, to sit on the board. And I was at the time I was 32. And I saw that as an opportunity to really become more influential in my role, and to have a broader impact on the company. So, but in terms of financial, the financial at Samsung at the time, I think I averaged out at the end on 65K, I think, as a
Mm-hmm.
basic. When I shifted to become a director of marketing, so this would have been in 2013 at Sodexo, it was 70K. So it was only 5K more. But it was about the opportunity of the role. So I decided to go for it. And it was actually at a time where they were exploring acquisition to expand in the UK as well. So when I joined, I was on a board and I had a team of 4 at the time. But with the planned expansion and acquisition, the team jumped to just under 50. So they wanted someone to come in to help with the M&A, but also to then help what is a period of enormous change: people, leadership, function, product, brand, go to market. So for me, I was like, I don't really care. It's only 5K more. This is an amazing opportunity. And at the time, Claudia, I thought to myself, I'll do it for 2 years, get a board role on my CV, do a couple of cool projects, and then I'll move on for more money. I actually ended up staying for 10 years. And so because I think when you join a board, it's very different. It's very different than I think from not being on the board. And the reason why I say it, and not everyone might agree, but through my lens, the moment you join a board of a company, it's your company. You really feel as if it's your company. And when I made decisions as a marketeer, a strategist, and a product lead in terms of what my functional responsibility was. But I also made decisions as a leader in the business, which changes your decision making, because before you'd make decisions, I don't care what the other departments say. I want to do this because marketing want this. Whereas now I was making decisions with business empathy. I was thinking about the whole business, and I would make decisions that weren't in favor of, in inverted commas, marketing budget or marketing activity because it was right for the business, at the time. So I decided to go into this role, and in the 10 years I spent it's absolutely amazing. The level of responsibility that I had as a member of a board is totally different than what I'd ever experienced before. I had compliance commitments because of the nature of the position I was in. I was dealing with so many different stakeholders. At times I was kind of stepping in for the CEO, just as part of my development path. And I was getting a flavor of what that looks like as an individual, which is exciting and incredibly lonely at the same time.
Fabulous. Okay. So let's just go on to some, I guess, quick fire questions around the types of, I guess, career that people could follow in your lead, if that makes sense. So what would you say are the best parts of being a product marketer?
I think the best parts are you get 360-degree exposure to the business. Absolutely amazing. One day you're working with communications, sales, dealer channel, finance, operations, R&D, development team. Amazing. You cannot get any more diverse and exposure than that. And I think that's superb. So I think that's one of the best things about it. And I think the other thing, it gives people the opportunity to find a fire of passion for something in a product. I think when you really connect with it. And I think those two things are really important. I think they ground you really well for moving sideways, horizontal, squiggly, up, down, wherever. I think they're really good grounders for you.
Yeah, I would agree, actually. And so we've kind of already touched on it in terms of, you need to have a lot of resilience, but what are the worst parts of the job, would you say?
For product management, product marketing? Yeah, I think, yes, you are, because you're so exposed across so many different areas, that means that you can also be exposed to the negatives of that. And I think that's probably one of the worst things, if I'm honest. I think because you can, if you get 2 or 3 in a row from people that are disappointed in different functions, you suddenly believe that the world's falling apart and you have no idea how you're going to resolve this. And I think that's probably the big standout for me, if I'm honest, in terms of the worst things. And also, if sales drop, that naturally happens in a product's life cycle. I believe that. And it's not always in your control, but you feel more exposed to it. So they're probably the 2 things, Claudia, that I would say.
Awesome. Okay. And what would you say is the best advice you've ever received from a mentor, someone who is in leadership? I don't know, someone that you've directly reported into?
I think it's actually linked back to the 3 core skills that I talk about. The best thing they've ever said to me was they said, they didn't quite say storytelling, but they said, Jamie, if you can't communicate, you can't get on with people, and that's it. That's you done. If you can't get on with people, then you'll limit yourself. So that was one of the first things they said. And then the other thing they said to me, which is kind of linked, was take pride in what you do, because it's what stands you out. So, those would be the 2 I would say that stood out to me, and I've kind of evolved them over time, but they still, I think, reign true today. To be honest, they're timeless. I see they're timeless tips that, regardless of change in technology and the environment, they still remain the same.
Definitely. And what actionable steps would you recommend to those looking to get into the industry? Firstly, do you need a degree or not? And if not, what else would you recommend?
So I needed a degree. Without the degree, and without a story about sprouts that led onto a book, I would never have done that path. So I would say, okay, let me take a step back. So in my previous role, last 10 years, I've recruited a ton of people, but alongside my leaders as well, my management team that reported into me. We would never discount anyone because they didn't have a degree. It's, for us, it was more about, number one, the person, their core skills as a person, then the technicalities and experience, then educational background. Because I think you can have the other 2, but you can't work with anyone. You can be really difficult to work with, and then everything else collapses. So that would always be how we look at things. So I don't think you necessarily need a degree, in my opinion, in this pathway into marketing. What you do need is to work your network. I think that's potentially a lot more valuable. So people need to get to know you. If they get to know you, they know what you're good at. And if they know what you're good at, they'd recommend you to someone else. And I think that holds a lot of value. So I don't think it's necessary, a degree. I think there are courses, technical courses that you can take now for free. I mean, marketing's becoming more centered around tools, the use of tools and data, sometimes more than the actual person core skills themselves, if that makes any sense. So because you can hide behind the tools and tech, but you still need to work with people. So I think you can pick up free courses. Google do a ton, HubSpot do a ton, and you can learn, LinkedIn do a ton. So you can pick up on this. And I think technical skills are important to keep yourself relevant. But I don't think you need to have a degree to step in my opinion.
Awesome. And this is a similar-ish question, but I was going to ask around what resources would you recommend? I mean, obviously you've mentioned HubSpot, Google, etc. But are there any podcasts that you would recommend that people listen to, and potentially your book?
Well, so to not do a shameless plug here, but I will. I think there are a combination of different resources that you can do. I think first and foremost, before I get onto the book, is find a great mentor. Find someone that you can connect with. So I do some mentoring at the moment. I check in with people every month. It's nothing formal. It's nothing paid. It's just people that have reached out to me and said, would you mind sharing? And I said, of course I would. So I think that's really important for people that have been there and done it and can share some advice. That's the first thing. I think, not everyone loves a book, which is why I'm partway doing my audiobook at the moment. But I think books are good. I would recommend my book, if I may. 28 Bags of Sprouts, Storytelling with Impact. And because I've got a unique storytelling framework called the Sprout Model, and I think you can use something like that you can practice every single day. So I think books are great resources. You can find it on Amazon, and those are really good. And other books. So I think maybe not technically linked, but there's one of the contributors of my book is a chap called Simon Alexander Ong. And he has a book called Energize. It's really good just about managing your personal energy, which then feeds into how you perform in the workplace, which I talk about in my book. So I think that, books like that are quite interesting, not always technically linked, but are associated with. And I think, there's no specific podcasts for me I would call out technically for this. The podcast that I've been listening to more outside of yours, Claudia, there's a chap called Jay Shetty, who does a lot of mindfulness, self-help. And I think depending on where you are in your career, technically you might be on point, but you're going through a period where you just need a bit of different type of support. And I think maybe some of the messages on there are quite, I mean, for me, I've gone through a massive period of change. I've gone from very experienced to a student of writing, which, you know, it's worked out quite well so far, which is good. But I've needed some messages mentally just to help me keep me going. And I think sometimes that's important as well. So those would be some reflections, but the book would be a great buy for anyone that's interested.
No, I absolutely agree with you on that, Jamie. I think mindset and being in the right headspace in order to be your best self.
Yeah.
Also understand that you're going to go through periods of low, I think are really, really helpful, and to find that resilience within and find those building blocks that you can probably find within those podcasts too to help you on your journey. So,
and also just Claudia, if I may just very quickly jump in, make a great point there, because I think when a lot of the listeners on this call, if they're in leadership positions or they're aspiring to be leadership positions, I think one of the key things is being really aware of not just yourself, but others around you, because people will go through life moments that will impact who they are. And that doesn't mean that they're underperforming or that they've changed in skill sets. They're just going through a difficult time. And I think being a leader, being aware of that, having the emotional intelligence around that will allow you to help them and allow them time. You know, but I've seen so many leaders that just think, well, they're not performing, let's get shot of them. It's the worst thing you could do. And I've had to help people through long periods, but you know what? They come out the other end, and the loyalty and engagement that comes from that is significant. So a key top tip for new or aspiring or even experienced leaders is be aware, be aware of that. Sorry to jump in, but it's important.
No, wonderful point, and I absolutely love that. So thank you for that little sprinkle of wisdom there. Well, Jamie, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for giving all your insights, and I hope everyone enjoys.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you so much for listening to the What Do You Do podcast. Whether you're looking for a job or ready to find your latest inspired hire, head over to whatdoyoudo.com/jobs or click the link in the description. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share with anyone you think would love this episode.